Welcome to the Breadwinners, the podcast where we talk about what it actually takes to lead and earn when the world keeps shifting under your feet. I'm Rachael Lowell. For nearly 20 years, I've been coaching leaders at top-tier institutions and Fortune 500s through massive change. But what's happening now is different. The pace, the pressure, the way it's hitting people's work and their lives. When everything feels urgent, it's easy to grab for the next credential, the next certification, the next thing that might make you feel safe. But that's usually not the answer. Dorie Clark has been thinking about this for decades. She's a consultant and keynote speaker, a Duke Fuqua professor, and the author of The Long Game, Reinventing You and Stand Out. She spent years helping people figure out how to stand out in a marketplace that keeps getting more crowded and now more automated. In today's episode, we talk about what happens when the career you planned disappears, how to think in decades when everything around you moves in days, and why being a good friend might be the most underrated professional skill. Let's dive in.
Dorie, welcome to the Breadwinners. This is such a treat.
Rachael, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
I mentioned this before we started the conversation, but just looking back at your career, what you've written, how you've taught, it's been wonderful to review all of the work that you've done over the course of your career to talk about what career paths look like, what earning and living and influencing looks like. So excited to hear a little bit about your path and how did you come to this perspective on what it means to build a career and how did that compare to your early days? So if you could tell us a little bit about early Dorie Clark, growing up, what ideas did you have about breadwinning, about how work and life work together? Was it always this entrepreneurial idea, or spoiler alert, I think the answer is no?
I think unless you grew up in an entrepreneurial family, probably is rare for that to be the first line of imagining for kids. But my dad was a psychiatrist. And so technically, I guess he was an entrepreneur. I mean, nowadays, a lot of people, I don't know, they work for PE enterprises or something like, private equity buys all these medical practices. But he had his own business. I think he was actually not very good of a businessman. Like that was not how he thought of himself. I think like many sort of mission-driven entrepreneurs, he liked doing his thing and running the business was the necessary evil that surrounded it. So it was definitely not his priority. I don't think he was a master at that.
How did you see that playing out as a kid? Like, how did you pick up on that?
My dad was a person who had a lot of kind of extremes. From the time I've been young, I wrote this book about long-term thinking, The Long Game, and we're going to discuss this a little bit later.
We are going to discuss it.
But I feel like I've always been reasonably good at kind of projecting long-term and thinking about like, well, what do I want and how do I get there and what does it look like? And I felt like my dad was sometimes just doing things. He was the person that one time I came home and for a while, his workplace was at our house. And so it wasn't just him seeing patients, which, I guess is sort of fine. But it was like, there was like a whole staff. There was other doctors and there was like PAs and stuff at our house, which was kind of weird. And I was a little kid and I'd come home and there'd be all these people. And it's like, oh, and there's Larry in the kitchen and there's Connie in the living room and they're getting coffee. And, so it was a little bit like kind of chaotic in this way. I mean, it's almost like a sitcom, right? Because they were all psychiatrists, like seeing these people who were having these problems. So it really would have fit in on the Bob Newhart show. But he bought this, it was like I think a midlife crisis situation. So he bought this red convertible and I didn't know whose it was because suddenly it's in the parking lot. And I thought, oh, is it Larry's? No, it was my dad's. And he had gone on a business trip. He had gotten bored and he bought this red convertible. And he never really drove it because it was very impractical. And my mother was just appalled. It was like not money we needed to spend. But I just saw all that and I'm like, oh, really, I could do better. And it's unfortunate that I can do better because I'm 9.
Oh my God, what I wouldn't give to me 9-year-old Dorie. But yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm big on the fiscal responsibility train. You grew up, and I'm trying to remember, it's by Lowell, right?
Correct.
Did you,
yeah.
So,
yeah.
Chelmsford, was it?
No, Lexington.
Oh, in Lexington. Oh, okay. And so what did you learn about breadwinning growing up?
Fantastic question. Well, first of all, my dad's convertibles were white.
There we go.
But similarly, my parents both were into kind of social impact work. So my dad ended up running a Jewish Big Brothers Big Sisters for a couple decades. And his training had been in a doctorate in social work and juvenile justice programs. And that's kind of how he came into that. And my mom, Jewish educator who won't retire. She's in her 70s.
Wow. So she's in her 70s and she's still doing this? She's still working in Jewish education? That's amazing.
Well, she's fundraising now for a Jewish educational institution. But one of the things that I saw with my parents, I don't know that fiscal responsibility was a theme that I saw or didn't see, but I did see something that you talk about in your last TED Talk, which is this sort of like the busyness of work taking up a lot of space in our house. Meeting after meeting after meeting wouldn't necessarily result in the work being done any differently, but I saw the way work and life were interacting, and I think that's played a big role in what I've chosen to look at and explore in terms of career, in terms of organizational systems, right? Is like, how can we do this in a way where we're meeting the goals and we are living our lives in more of an integrated way? So I think that's what came up for me. But they also had a lot of caregiving responsibilities. I have a brother with Down syndrome and a younger brother. So they had a lot of systems to navigate in the world around like special education and that kind of advocacy piece.
Wow, what an interesting background and frame for all the work you do today. That's very cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it's played a pretty big role. The older I get, the more I kind of see how the pieces fit together. But thank you. Yeah, I think that there was an idea that I had, and I'm curious about how this played out for you, given what your dad did. I was raised with this idea that if you sort of got the degrees and worked really hard and head down, power through, that ultimately all the financial pieces, all the logistical pieces would sort of like sort themselves out. And that was a really naive perspective, obviously. But that was sort of the community I grew up in, it was middle to upper middle class. Everybody was trying to go to Ivies. I grew up in a very competitive Massachusetts town. So that was what I came to see. And I'm curious for you, I know you went on that road of academia, of public policy, and then you went to Harvard Divinity School. Curious, did you go in with similar ideas about kind of how things would work? Or at that point, did you already know, given what you'd seen with your dad in entrepreneurship, that it was sort of a different equation?
Yeah, I think you raise a really important point. We're all, to a certain extent, kind of brainwashed by our upbringing. And I grew up in a very sort of similar ideological frame. It mattered a lot to me where I went to school and sort of the status behind that, not necessarily a quest for social status, but intellectual status mattered very much to me. And it was important to be perceived in that way. And I think it's just a very particular ideology. It's like money is good and is useful, but the quest really isn't about money. It's about something very different. Like every community has its own form of status, like status as a token. I think that intellectual accomplishment and being at the right places was sort of a North Star for me in a very implicit and ingrained way. And so I did seek that out.
Do you think that you saw, this was when I went to Columbia for grad school, I think I was like, and this is what will get me to kind of the income trajectory that I wanted. Did you feel like you saw that connection between the intellectual accomplishment and pursuit and what your life would look like? Or were you sort of not putting those pieces together in the early stages?
Yeah, I would have been very quickly disabused since the Ivy that I went to, as you mentioned, was divinity school. It is not the path to lucre, certainly not the straightest one. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the first sort of stab I had at thinking about a career and what it would look like was to be a university professor. And so I got my master's degree and I thought, well, I'm going to go on and get a doctorate and then I can be a professor. And if it plays out in the right way, That's right. You'll get, you won't get like crazy wealthy, but you will have a very nice 6-figure comfortable salary. If you get tenure, which everybody hopes to do, you will have this like very secure employment. Like you will be able to have a very nice life for yourself. And what I was not fully processing at the time is that those arrangements, which had been the arrangements starting in the 60s up until the time that I was in school in the 90s, were really starting to break at that point, because the number of students declined, and there were economic changes that anyone in higher ed, can tell you about ad infinitum. But broadly speaking, the number of tenure track jobs got decimated. Now it's a lot of adjunct positions that'll pay you $2,500 for a course. And so you really can't make a living in the same way. And a very, very narrow band of people can, but it's kind of the middle class equivalent of like being a basketball player. Like, you can get really rich being a basketball player, but it is highly unlikely.
Right.
So I think that I didn't really understand the macroeconomic forces. And then similarly, the other thing that as a humanities obsessed person, I thought was a good plan B for myself when it didn't work out for me in academia, because I did not get into the doctoral programs that I wanted to. I later was able to kind of circle back, but that was later. But I thought, okay, I'll be a journalist. Journalism, in a very similar way, was at its absolute historical economic peak in the year 2000. Print journalism had its most lucrative year ever in 2000, which was the year I got hired as a print journalist. And then I immediately got laid off in 2001 because its revenues started to tank as a result of the internet. So they were not bad plans. Both would have given me a middle class or upper middle class living that would have been fine, but it was just not the right bet. So I did need to come up with something else. And your point, I think, is well made, because we were talking earlier about an online course and community that I run called Recognized Expert. And a thing that I see very frequently, and there's, nearly 1,000 people in this community, so I have a pretty good broad base to draw from, is that it is incredibly common for people to come in and join where they are frustrated because they are almost overeducated. They sort of grew up with this view that like one more certificate, one more degree, like one more credential, that is going to be the ticket. That's going to be the thing that gets you on the path to economic security. You can't keep doing more of that. You need to do this other thing in order to build your platform and build your business, because one more credential, I promise you, is not going to be it.
At one point in my career, I was coaching a lot of parents in transition. So with younger kids who were re-envisioning their careers. I remember this one woman, she had couple doctorates and like 2 masters. And she was like, I'd like to go into nonprofit management. I said, great. Let's think about your next steps. And she was like, well, what degree do you think I should get to go into nonprofit management? Because it just feels safer.
Yes. What is $100,000 I can spend so I can get a $30,000 job?
It's interesting that for me, I certainly felt that way at one point. I met her after I did my grad school degree. And then when I went and did work at the same place where you got your divinity school degree, I really saw from the inside out what those master's programs were structured to do and what was missing in terms of helping people around on their career path. So you were let go from print journalism. And I know you started your consultancy in 2006, I think. Is that right?
That is correct, yeah.
Walk us through those few years. That was a very obviously tumultuous time in the world, a tragic time in the world where a lot was changing. How did that get you to a place where you were starting to let go of this idea of career ladders and see it as a different animal altogether?
Yeah, my time in the wilderness.
Exactly.
I spent those 5 years, if I'm being really honest, trying to cling desperately to the last thing. And I think that part of what informed my first book that I wrote, Reinventing You, was having the personal understanding that a lot of times our reinventions are very unplanned, unwanted. You're kind of shaking your fist at the sky for a while, being like, I wanted this other thing. Why can't I have that thing? Why do I have to have this new thing I don't want? Sometimes it's great and sometimes it's exciting, but a lot of times it's not. And we have to reckon with that and sort of make peace with that, because part of reinvention is recognizing like, oh, okay, a door was closed on me. And so now I have to do a new thing. And there's like a grieving that's associated with that in some ways.
Sure. Radical acceptance, right? That idea. But I think what's so cool, Dorie, about you is how there's something in there where it goes from that grieving to this kind of creative spark. How long did that take to build? I mean, as somebody who's read your work over the years, I think that's what I've found so exciting is you go from these changes to what's possible as a result of that. So I'd love to hear more about how, as you were letting go, how did you arrive at this other new possible direction?
Yeah, thank you. So as you mentioned, I got laid off from my job at the newspaper, and I got laid off on a sort of inauspicious time. It was September 10th, 2001. So the next day we wake up, there's terrorist attacks. It's horrible. America's grieving, etc. And everything felt very unstable economically. I mean, we might not even remember now, but literally they closed the stock market for nearly a week. They just shut it down. And it's like, oh God, the whole economy is shuttered. Like, how am I going to find a job? What is this going to look like? What are things going to be now? And that was stressful. Of course, I wanted to get another job right away. I looked at the Boston Globe, which was the big paper in town. And they had a hiring freeze then. They were very nice to me, but they weren't hiring. And I just, I had to sort of wait around. What I did in the interim to earn money was I started freelancing. And freelancing as a journalist was actually really my first taste of entrepreneurship. It was so good for me. I think, honestly, it's so salubrious for people to earn money as a freelancer or as an entrepreneur, because there was just this clarity that, like, if you can come up with an idea that is good enough that an editor will say yes, you will get money. And if you can't, then you will not. And it's like, oh, because sometimes when you're in a job, you're actually protected a little too much. Whereas if you are freelancing, it's like up or down, yes or no. They feel no compunction whatsoever about telling you, nope, this sucks. We're not giving you money for this. And so you have to get good really fast. And that was so crystallizing for me. And for about 6 months until I got my next job, I did that. And it was one of the most formative times for me in my life. I freelanced for the Globe, for a bunch of other publications as well. And it helped me with something that I still do to this day. And the mastermind that I run and things like that, I will often help members with this, which is, okay, you have this kind of amorphous idea. You want to write an article, you want to do something, but how do you hone it? And I'm still, as a result of that training 25 years ago, able to distill, like, okay, what's special about this? What's distinct? How do we turn it into an angle? How do we make it a pitch? And that honestly has been a very valuable skill.
Yeah, can imagine that. I mean, you took the shift assessment, which I offer to folks, that little snapshot, and you so clearly think about where things are going, right? The horizon was your strength. You think about the future, what skills we need, what stories people need to hear. So I can imagine that being a really strong place for you. So you wrote your first book in, what year was it that you wrote?
It was published in 2013. So I started literally writing it in like 2011, and then it came out in 2013.
So what were you, because it sounds like you went on this personal journey of learning how to pitch these stories, pitch these ideas, get to yes, essentially, and get the money in the bank. And I'm curious, what were you seeing around you as you were building those muscles, where you were seeing people really needing this kind of insight on re-envisioning their career paths? Today, when we're seeing industries collapse and we're seeing AI come out of the blue and we're seeing this constant moment of change, this idea, or the ideas that you've had have been evergreen, but helping people understand, how do you stay in the long game when everything is changing? I think people want to feel like they can understand what's happening in the world right now. I can build something that responds to that, right? And that's going to carry me forward. And I think you've seen that both for yourself and for the folks that you work with, that there's a need for a different way of seeing things. So I'm just wondering how that came from Dorie's experience to a message to share with the world.
Well, I think I have had the good fortune, and part of it is skill, but I'm also sure that part of it is luck, of having a very firm conviction and sort of beating a drum that has stayed relevant for a while. but its form changes over time. And so specifically how this came out of my experience, when I began my business in 2006, I made a lot of mistakes, as many people do when they start a business. And one of the biggest, which I always counsel people now not to do, is I waited until I had quit my previous job. So now I'm like sitting at my desk, like, what do I do? That is when I started looking for clients. And it's like, oh God, no. Start looking for clients, start building your business on the side, on your spare time while you have it, so that you can get the kinks out, so that you can get product market fit, you can establish what people want. And then you're in a much safer place when you actually are full-time, because you know that people want it. And so I had to do a lot of pivoting around when I first started. And it took probably a year for me to get a sense of like, well, what is this business? What do people want to pay me for? How does this work? But I really quickly realized that the fundamental problem that I had was the minute I launched my business, like, oh my God, how did I not know this? Everybody in the world has the same business as I do. And it just seemed like there was competitors everywhere. And people, would be asking me like, well, why should I choose you? Sometimes they were being obnoxious, but sometimes they were literally just being nice, but they were confused. And I didn't know how to answer. And it was very upsetting. Like, I feel like an idiot. Why don't I know why to answer? Like, I know I'm awesome, but how do I tell you I'm awesome? And it was stressful, right? What I have become keenly aware of, and I think this is kind of the through line of what I do, is that the most important thing for me as I started my business and tried to raise it from like, zero up to first solvency and then success, was that I needed to differentiate myself in the marketplace. Because you were speaking earlier about, what are the things that never change? Well, as Jeff Bezos has observed, customers are never going to wish they paid more for a product, right? Like, when all else is equal, people are always going to go to the low price. And that is bad for you as the provider, unless you can give them a very good reason why they should pick you at a higher price than, whatever the low is. And so it used to be like, okay, well, just there's other people in your town that are competitors. 15 years ago, a big thing was like, oh, now we have competition from Elance and Fiverr and, Upwork and all these different things. Right. So you've got somebody who can do your thing in India or in Poland or wherever. It's much cheaper. So, okay, you have to be better than that. And now it's like, oh my God, it's not even like, oh, but they'll take $6 an hour. It's like, no, ChatGPT will take $20 a month and they can do it. So I think that the through line is just always, how do you individuate yourself in the marketplace so that people want to do business with you and feel much more confident doing business with you than any other option, including one that is vastly cheaper. And it's a high bar, but if we can meet it, that's how you can have a successful, lasting career.
I love that. And for me, as an entrepreneur, that really resonates. I'm curious, though, for other people who, I've spoken to a lot of people who are ex-federal government, ex-USAID. I worked with an organization called Grounded Idealist, which is like a whole kind of community of folks, coaches, and ex-federal employees. And I'm wondering, what's the first thing that you would tell someone to do who's just been let go of a career that they thought was kind of evergreen, right? Like they thought it was forever. And it wasn't. And they're trying to figure out, what's my unique value proposition, right? What am I bringing to the table? How do I articulate that? What's the piece of advice would you give to folks in that circumstance?
Yeah, thank you, Rachael, because I think this is an important question. And it's important to specify, like, what I'm not saying is everybody in the world has to be like a world expert at something, because first of all, it's not really practical. Second of all, people are like, well, how would that even work? I think that a point of individuation that we all have access to, that people don't really understand the full importance of, is just simply being likable and being easy to do business with. Those are two really simple, powerful things. People can be obnoxious and peremptory and just make your life harder. And if you can instead be the opposite of that, if you can be a person like, oh, it is a joy to do business with her. I love seeing her. She's so friendly. She's so efficient. If she doesn't know, she promises me an answer and she gets me an answer. Like, these feel like table stakes things, but they are so absolutely not. And you can really excel with that. And just having friends and being a person that people like to do things with. My favorite example of this, which I think is forever going to be my go-to in the age of AI. About a year ago, I was on this extremely intense George Michael kick. And I was like watching all the documentaries and reading all the books. Yeah. Are you into George Michael?
So much so that I can't even, when he died, a group of my friends and I got a karaoke room at a place in Brooklyn called Insa. And we just did like a whole medley. And I loved.
I wish I'd been there.
I know. Next time we do that again, I'll invite you.
My wife is so good to me. We went to England last year and we went on a private George Michael tour to see like all his places, like where he was born and where he lived and different things like that.
My producer's going to make fun of me, but we talk about Croutons, like interesting facts that our guests bring on. And that one fascinates me. So I want to talk about that another time, but I love this. So you went on a George Michael kick. I cut you off.
And so anyway, I think that Andrew Ridgeley, his former partner in Wham, is probably the most absolutely emblematic person of this. When I think about how do you survive in the AI era, I think about Andrew Ridgeley. And the reason I do is this. History has proven that Andrew Ridgeley, I'm so sorry, Andrew Ridgeley, was not super talented as a musician. Like, just facts here, right? He tried to have a solo career after George, didn't work that well. He tried to have an acting career after George, didn't work that well. But just for the sake of argument, let's stipulate that George was the talented one here in the musical sense. Okay, fine. Andrew Ridgeley has had an amazing, very successful, very lucrative and enjoyable life for himself. And the reason he was able to do it is because he was extremely fun to be around. He befriended George as a young man when George had just, come to the school, and he was like totally awkward and totally ugly before he got hot. And Andrew was the cool guy, and Andrew was nice to him and made him feel included. And so George always wanted to hang out with Andrew and be with him. And critically, this is 1984, right? George comes out to Andrew, and they're in the band already, and this could blow everything. Like, it was not cool at all to be openly gay. And Andrew was totally fine with George being gay and was supportive. When he did that, he just solidified, like, okay, Andrew is the guy you keep around. Andrew is the guy you want to do business with. And as a result, they have made all this amazing music with Wham. George gave him a writing credit on Careless Whisper, and that has essentially paid for the rest of Andrew's entire life. In a world of like, well, what can you offer? Can you be a friend? Can you be loyal? Can you be supportive? Can you be a person that talented people or institutions want to have with them? Let's hope that you're also very talented. But even if you aren't, you can be talented as a friend and as a person.
Such a fantastic example for so many reasons. I love it. And George, I'm going to turn on Freedom 90 like right after this. One thing that, not to cite someone else's book, but what's interesting to me, Herminia Ibarra's Working Identity is a book that I really love when it comes to these kind of change and transition points. And she talks about, it's a study, it's a how-to for folks changing careers. And she talks about crafting experiments, right? Kind of being drawn to working on things that you want to work on and shifting connections, right? Making connections with people who you might not have made connections with before. But then the last piece is about telling your story. You own so much of the space, but the telling your story, how to kind of take those experiences, you do that just so beautifully. And it's such an important piece because I think it doesn't matter what industry, what focus you have in your career, showing up as a human who can develop relationships is so key. So it leads me, I could talk to you forever, but it leads me to our carbo load section where we ask these very quick rapid fire questions. And our first question, which we ask everybody, is what will always be human about the way we work? And I think you've sort of given us most of that answer, but I'm curious if you have any pieces that you want to add to that in response to that question.
Yeah, I think I'll just double down on be a friend, be a good friend, and people will always want to find a way to include you.
Amazing. Okay, 2 more. I am curious. So you're recently married. Congratulations, Mazal Tov to you. As a breadwinner, when we go through these big life changes, sometimes it changes our perspective on work and life in a new way. Have you felt that breadwinning means something different now that you have a partner in crime in a way that it didn't before?
Yeah, it's actually very sweet. My wife is a salaried employee. She's a professor. And she's just starting to stretch her wings a little bit with some outside speaking, for instance, as she's building her own platform. And it was really nice because like a month or so ago, she gave a talk. It was the highest paid talk she's ever done. And she was so intent that she really wanted to deposit it in our joint account. And that was, very meaningful to her because she's like, I want to contribute and I want to, do this here in the joint account. And it was very sweet.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, she just really wanted to contribute in that way. And I think that there's something very powerful about the sense of shared purpose. So I think that's been a nice lens on breadwinning since getting married.
Oh, I love that. If you could choose any breadwinner, I like this question. If you could think about a breadwinner any time who's with us or not with us, who would you want to break bread with?
Yeah, if we were talking about breadwinning specifically, somebody that I'm always really impressed with in terms of their thoughtfulness and reach is like in the sort of the robber baron era, it would be Andrew Carnegie. I mean, we all know these guys were super monopolistic and did, shady things to amass all their fortunes. But the fact that he was so philanthropic in his later years and basically, established the concept of public libraries in so many places around the United States, like there wouldn't be public libraries if it weren't for Andrew Carnegie in many, many cities. I think that is very powerful. And nowadays, it's a little sad. I have friends who are librarians and it's like, okay, well now what is a library? Well, a library is like a homeless shelter, essentially, because we have screwed up views on what social services should look like. But I think a library at its heart, especially in the pre-internet era, this is a statement about like, I am going to fund a thing that is going to equalize opportunity. It is going to equalize the opportunity for self-motivated people to learn. Like he built the buildings and he said, I will build the buildings, you fill the buildings. Like you have to contribute as a city, which I think is valuable. But, I lived for many years in Somerville, Mass. And we had 3 Carnegie libraries in Somerville. In this 80,000 person city, there's 3 of them. Like we were lousy with Carnegie libraries. It's amazing. And I think a real contribution. So I think it would be fun to talk to him about that.
Dorie, I want to thank you for this conversation and thank you also for the permission that you lend people, the way that you inspire people to think differently, not in terms of deadlines and how am I going to get to here at this point, but in terms of what it means to stay anchored and focused on the long game when you're in this point of uncertainty and upheaval. And I think that's what we need right now. Your latest TED Talk talking about busyness versus, you had a great quote, work has become...
Yeah, an anesthetic.
And I think we really being able to trust our gut and see the rhythms differently than just busyness is something you've contributed to the world that we all treasure. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's so great to talk with you.
This has been the Breadwinners Podcast. I'm your host, Rachael Lowell. The show is produced by Rachael Lowell and Rachel Sklar. Technical production by Ron Pissarro. Music by Hannah Baki. With gratitude for support from Ruth Ann Harnisch. The Breadwinners was founded in 2019 by me and Jennifer Owens. The Breadwinners is a co-production between Smart Friends Network and Reworking Leadership. Thanks for listening.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.